Hello, everyone, and welcome to the PSI Effect. This is a podcast for people who want to rise on purpose. I'm Neug, and we have Franky here. We are your co-hosts on this life-changing journey. And you're here, so clearly we have something in common, right? And that is living through life's challenging setbacks. And these are setbacks that just shake your identity, just impede your plans, and most certainly disrupt your peace. And so we're going to talk about those setbacks. But most importantly, we're going to explore what it means to come back or how to come back, right, from those life-changing setbacks. So this podcast is for those folks who have ever asked themselves, how did I get here? What now? Or even, can I come back from this? Right. So we're going to explore those things, and we're gonna take a moment, and we're going to pause. We're going to shift, and we're going to ignite, and we'll get into what all of that means. That said, Franky, talk to us about walking through this setback fire and coming through on the other side. With one hand, we got wisdom, and on the other hand, we have truth. How we come out of this whole setback problem that we may have.
Hey, thanks, Nuge. And, I'm just super excited for us to, be here in this platform and with our listeners to be able to engage in these conversations. You and I have been through we've been through some things. We've seen some things, experienced some things. We haven't seen everything, and we don't have all the answers, that's for sure. But, I'm really looking forward to the conversations that you and I are going to have, and, the conversations with our guests. And I hope that the things we talk about will really enable us to give somebody that direction that they need, give them that piece of information to kind of help them get over the hump so that they can, get that comeback going and rise out of that challenge. So speaking of that fire, circling back to that, man, oh man, how hot the fire can be sometimes. You mentioned coming out on the other side with truth and wisdom. A lot of times the truth is, wow, man, that fire's hot. And that, right. And that wisdom is like, man, I don't want to touch that fire again. But there's more to it than that. There's depth in there. And reflexively, sometimes what we really want to do is when we're in that fire, when we're in the midst of crisis, we want to try to get out of it as quickly as possible. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But there's an opportunity when we have a setback, when we have a crisis, when we're in that fire. And it may seem contrary to everything that we may think, but that opportunity is to pause while we're there and kind of take an assessment of what's going on around us. How did we get here? What are my options? Because we need to know where we are if we want to effectively get where we want to be.
Well put, sir. Well put. Yeah, that fire can definitely be hot sometimes.
Indeed.
And, sometimes you can step your foot on that fire and you're just not expecting it, and just, things just kind of blow up, right?
Absolutely.
And all of a sudden you're just right there in the middle. That's part of what this podcast is all about, just talking through, exploring some of those scenarios and some of those issues to get past. And so, since we're talking about that, one of the things that, I wonder, what do you think most people get wrong when it comes to setback, or when it comes to trying to get out of a setback? What do you think people get wrong?
Man, I mean, what have I gotten wrong over the years? Good gracious. we learn so much when we make mistakes. Sometimes I think we learn more from a loss than we do from a win.
Mm.
And I think that notion kind of points us in the right direction there, to kind of start talking about that question. I think one of the things that I've personally gotten wrong when I've encountered a setback is that I internalize it. I try to, I have tried to view it as an indictment on my character,
Mm.
an attribute of who I am. Like failure, I'm an embodiment of failure. And that internalization, what's that word? That big old word, anthropomorphizing of, there we go, of,
I mean,
a
you might need to
failure,
break that down for some folks in the
right?
audience and me too, right? Because
Right.
there was a lot of letters in that
I know
word.
that's one of those Jeopardy words there. So when you anthropomorphize something, you take something that doesn't have, like, sometimes an inanimate object, and you try to view it through a lens of human nature. So you try to humanize something, right? So we try to own this setback as if it's a part of us, right? And sometimes that weight is just so heavy. And sometimes, we do contribute to where we are. We can't absolve ourselves of all responsibility there. But we get it wrong when all we do is internalize it, and we don't realize it to be what it really is. And that's an opportunity, a data point, a lesson that can shape future decisions. Because, like I said, I've learned a lot more from losses and the desire to avoid them again in the future that impact my decision making and my behaviors moving forward.
That's a very good point. You learn from your losses, and it impacts how you act and react in the future. It makes me think of growing up, and that Bible verse about sparing the rod, spoil a child. Well, my parents weren't stingy when it came to that.
It's like Oprah, you get the rod, you get the rod, you get the rod.
They were not stingy. But yeah, so you do. You brought some good points. When you have that failure, sometimes you feel shame, right? You feel like you failed. Um, your ego, your pride gets in the way, and you can't really see clearly, in that moment. So uh, that's some very some good points that you made there, and I'm going to have to learn that anthro
Anthropomorphize.
anthropomorphized.
There we go. We'll have this next script spelling bee here on the podcast.
I tell you what, that's a new one for me. You pulled that one out, buddy. You sure did. Oh goodness. All right, so that's good. So let me ask you another question. Like when you're in the middle of a setback, right? Where you have no clarity and everything just kind of fades, you have no timeline, right? What does pause really look like, right? Because you lost the fire is just you're just engulfed, right? So
Right.
what does pause really look like?
And it really depends on the situation and the person. You know, for for me, pause is asking questions, taking a moment to try to understand.
Mm.
You know, so many times when we're in a situation, we will react emotionally first before we can get to a rational response. So taking that pause allows us to deal with the emotion, because the emotion is always going to be there. The effort shouldn't be to try to remove emotion from our situation. It should be like, yes, I understand there's going to be emotion. Our goal should be to navigate the emotion so that we can get to a rational frame of mind. And that only happens when we pause. And that's when we ask questions, what's in my control? What's out of my control? What did I do, if anything, to contribute to this situation? What options are available to me? What can I learn from this? And that's when we're able to start to see the shift. That self-reflection is really the key, though, where we take a minute to take self-inventory of kind of where we are in the situation. How do I feel about this situation? What does this situation make me think about myself? What is my aspiration for a solution? Because if we don't have any of those things in place before we start trying to make our way, we might be running in circles in the fire. And that would be even worse.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the other part, for me is that, I got to be quiet, right? I got to take a moment and I got to be quiet. I got to be still, right? And I got to listen to what's on the inside, right? Can't be like, back in the day, back on the block. It's like, okay, boys, you got beef with me. I got beef with you. Let's go outside. Let's get it settled, right? We're way past that, right? We're way past that. But I just really have to be quiet, and I have to just kind of be a little introspective
Mhm.
um, to understand, what just happened, right? And I guess the other part that I think about sometimes for me is, what did I do here? Like, did I do this to myself?
Right. Right.
Did I do something to make this come about? Was my action in some way, you know, bring this upon me? And so, I take that moment, as you mentioned, reflection, to see, if it was something that I did myself, right? And sometimes it is, sometimes not. But I do want to ask myself that question, because I don't want to go into, my solution, whatever that may be,
Mhm.
not knowing that I did something that could have prevented, me walking in that flame. So reflection, yeah. And the other part is, you got to trust yourself, right? You got to trust yourself can um, that you can overcome, right?
Mhm.
If you don't trust yourself, that could be it's gonna be a slow walk back.
Yeah.
Confidence, and I know that's not easy. And it's easy to say, and some folks, depending on the situation, may not have the confidence to get out of where they are. And there's some other things that come into play there, but just believing in yourself, and being true to yourself, um, being honest with yourself as you're having that time of reflection and that time of pause. So
Yeah. And, we could have a whole episode where we dive into to trust. Um, trusting ourselves, trusting others around us. And I'm glad you mentioned, it's easy for us to talk about, trust. It's easy for us to talk about this self-reflection. But just leaning into that self-reflection a little bit, that's difficult, because if you're doing self-reflection, if you're really looking inside, it's like we hear the wonderful song by Michael Jackson, "The Man in the Mirror." If you're taking that real close look, you're going to have to be vulnerable, and you have to be honest with yourself, because sometimes when we take that look inside, we're going to see something we may not like.
man, that's hard. That is hard sometimes.
And yeah.
And you're being honest with yourself about a situation. Uh, yeah, that's difficult.
Mhm.
Yeah. So one more quick question for you. So what 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 part of the comeback, uh uh what part of the comeback started or starts before you even realize that you're coming back?
Mm. It's almost like, that question just makes me think of, like, your superhero origin story. Something happens, and then this power is building within you that's going to take you to a whole another level, type of thing. Um, I think one of the things that tends to happen and we don't even realize it is growth. when we're in that situation, we're in that fire, we are uncomfortable. We are uncomfortable.
Oh, you said something there.
Right? And when we're uncomfortable, we've got several directions that we can go, but it's, that's when we're the most apt to grow, because we want to grow and evolve out of the state we're in to something better. So many times, when you're experiencing that setback, when I've experienced setbacks and failures, that pause is what kickstarts that growth process so that I can shift my mindset and get moving again. So yeah, that growth is what starts it for me.
Yeah, taking the first step, you know, because you got to do something, right? So taking that first step um, can certainly be the start, and you're not even realize it because maybe you're just reacting and you're taking that step before you really giving it some thought. But I think when you come out of that self-reflection, there's a point or a point in time that something just changes in you, right? That you start to see or start to feel different about the situation, right? Because you've taken that time to give it some thought, right? So, for me, it's coming out of that silence, coming out of that reflection period with, something that has surfaced, through my subconscious, what have you. But something's different. And so now I know that, I've made a shift, whether it's the right shift or the wrong shift, only time will tell. But I think that, you know, inner, that inner peace, if you will, that I was able to come up with for the moment, that shift inside is when I think that the comeback begins, at least for me.
Yeah. And, you know, sometimes too, it's a trap in that we want to hit home runs all the time. That shift and that beginning of the comeback isn't always going to be a home run. To use a baseball analogy, we want to step up to the plate, hit a grand slam. It's the greatest comeback story of all time. But sometimes it's the small steps that add up to get us to that ignition. We talked to some NASA engineers. I'm sure they'll tell us that, the ignition to launch a rocket into space is a multi-step process. It doesn't happen all at once. And I think the same is true for us as we're beginning to make our way out of, whatever quagmire we may be in. It's going to be an iterative process with multiple steps along the way.
Sure. Cool. Well, we're giving the folks a little insight into what PSI effect is. Why don't you explain to them what the P and the S and the I actually mean in this platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So the PSI Effect podcast. So P is for pause, taking a moment to assess, self-reflect. S is for shift. And what we want to do is we want to shift our mindset, shift the situations, shift our perception so that we can find new paths forward to ignite. That's what our I stands for. Ignite. We want to ignite and rise like a phoenix, rise on purpose. Like we see that in our logo. We want to pause, we want to shift, and then we want to ignite so that we can rise from whatever setback we may have encountered and find our way.
Awesome. Yeah, that whole ignition piece, that I think that's the satisfactory part of the comeback, right? So good deal. All right, so now that we've given our audience a sneak peek behind the proverbial curtain of the PSI effect, we want to invite you, our audience, to join us next time as we begin this journey and we start to rise on purpose. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the PSI Effect podcast. This show doesn't happen without you, and you can connect with us via Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you get your podcasts. Visit our website at thisispsipod.com and find us on YouTube and social media at This Is PSI Pod. That's at This Is PSI Pod. Until next time, remember, be brave and rise on purpose.